It was a typical evening in our middle-class neighborhood, but the hushed voices coming from the kitchen were anything but ordinary. As I passed by, the words my parents exchanged made me stop dead in my tracks. "It's just not feasible. With Kale's potential on the line, Rowan will be fine with her aunt." My heart sank as the realization hit me. They were discussing sending me away to live with my aunt while the family moved to further my younger brother's sports career. The sacrifices they were willing to make for Kale, at my expense, stung deeply. But what about my dreams? I wanted to scream, but the words never left my lips. Instead, I retreated to my room, a knot forming in my throat as I fought back tears of betrayal. The following days were a blur as my parents made the necessary arrangements. Their decision was final, and my protests fell on deaf ears. Kale's potential was their sole focus, leaving no room for my aspirations or desires. Within a week, I found myself in my aunt's modest apartment, surrounded by unfamiliar walls and a sense of displacement. While Aunt Marla tried her best to make me feel welcome, the ache of being cast aside lingered. As the weeks passed, the neglect I felt only intensified. Conversations were dominated by Kale's achievements, with Aunt Marla's dismissive comments like, "Just focus on your school, dear. Let's leave the spotlight for Kale." My talents and passions seemed to fade into insignificance, overshadowed by the glory bestowed upon my brother. But a tiny spark within me refused to be extinguished. It was during my school's literary club meetings that I found solace in the written word. The rhythmic flow of sentences and the power of storytelling ignited a fire within me, a fire that would soon blaze into an inferno of defiance. The modest apartment felt suffocating, a constant reminder of my diminished standing within the family. Even here, under Aunt Marla's roof, the shadow of Kale's success loomed large, obscuring any chance for me to shine. "Did you hear about Kale's latest tournament win?" Aunt Marla would gush, her eyes sparkling with pride as she recounted every detail. "He's on track to become a true champion." I forced a smile, swallowing the bitter resentment that threatened to spill out. It seemed no matter where I went, my brother's accomplishments overshadowed my own existence. School offered a temporary respite, a place where I could escape the constant comparisons and find solace in the written word. The literary club became my sanctuary, a haven where my talents were nurtured and celebrated. Mrs. Wilkins, the club's advisor, saw something in me that even my own family had overlooked. "Your writing has such depth and emotion," she would say, her gentle encouragement fueling my passion. As the weeks turned into months, my skills flourished, and I found myself pouring my heart and soul into every piece I crafted. The lines between fiction and reality blurred as I wove tales of neglect and resentment, channeling the turmoil that had become my constant companion. "Rowan, this is exceptional work," Mrs. Wilkins beamed one day, holding up a script I had written. "Have you considered submitting it to the state competition?" I hesitated, the familiar doubts creeping in. Would my family even care if I succeeded? Or would they simply brush it aside, as they had done countless times before? But something within me stirred, a burning desire to prove my worth, to step out from Kale's overwhelming shadow and claim my own spotlight. "I'll do it," I declared, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. The weeks leading up to the competition were a blur of late nights and frantic revisions. I poured every ounce of my being into that script, infusing it with the raw emotions that had festered for far too long. When the results were announced, and my name echoed through the auditorium as the winner, I should have felt elated. But the hollow silence that greeted me upon returning home was deafening. "That's nice," Aunt Marla offered half-heartedly. "Anyway, did you hear Kale is now ranked statewide?" That was the final straw. Years of bottled-up frustration and resentment erupted, igniting a fire within me that could no longer be contained. With trembling fingers I created a new blog, pouring my heart and soul into every word. This would be my voice, my platform to expose the injustice of parental favoritism that had plagued my life. Little did I know, the spark I had ignited would soon become an inferno, one that would consume everything in its path, and change the course of my life forever. In the weeks that followed my state competition victory, the euphoria of accomplishment slowly faded, replaced by a familiar ache of neglect. As the accolades trickled in, my family's indifference was deafening. Congratulations on your win, Aunt Marla offered half-heartedly during one of our rare interactions. It's just too bad it couldn't be a real sport like Kale's. Her words stung like a slap across the face, magnifying the sense of injustice that had been simmering within me. Why was my passion for writing seen as inferior, while Kale's athletic pursuits were placed on a pedestal? The blog, my secret outlet for venting my frustrations, became a beacon of solace. With each entry, I poured out the raw emotions that had been bottled up for far too long, exposing the harsh realities of parental favoritism. Today, my family proved once again that my achievements are nothing more than a footnote in the grand narrative of my brother's success, I wrote, my fingers furiously tapping away at the keyboard. Little did I know, my words were striking a chord with readers far beyond the confines of my small world. Comments flooded in, each one a validation of the pain I had endured. This speaks volumes about forgotten kids. I can relate to the feelings of neglect so deeply. Keep writing. Your voice is being heard. With each message of support, a newfound sense of purpose ignited within me. I was no longer just venting my personal grievances. I was giving voice to a silent struggle shared by countless others. It was then that the unexpected happened. An email from a publisher, expressing interest in turning my blog into a book. They saw the raw, unfiltered emotion in my words and believed my story needed to be shared on a larger scale. For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. Would putting my family's dysfunction on public display only further alienate me from them? But the allure of finally being seen, of having my voice amplified, proved too strong to resist. Without seeking approval or even mentioning it to my relatives, I accepted the publisher's offer. This was my chance to break free from the shadows that had suffocated me for far too long. The following months were a whirlwind of interviews, revisions, and countless sleepless nights spent pouring my soul onto the pages. Each chapter was a cathartic release, a purging of the pain and resentment that had festered for years. Finally, the day of the book launch arrived, and I found myself surrounded by strangers who had become kindred spirits through the shared experience of my words. As I clutched the freshly printed copy, a sense of pride and accomplishment washed over me, a feeling I had craved for so long. But the euphoria was short-lived. Within days, news of my book's controversial subject matter had spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of backlash from the very people it exposed. How could you air our dirty laundry like that? Aunt Marla's voice crackled through the phone, laced with a mixture of anger and disbelief. It was then that I realized there was no turning back. The consequences of my actions had been unleashed, and the only path forward was through the flames I had ignited myself. The backlash from my family was swift and unrelenting. Aunt Marla's scolding phone call was just the beginning of a firestorm that threatened to consume me entirely. "You've betrayed us all." My mother's shrill voice echoed through the receiver, her words dripping with venom. "How could you put our personal lives on display like that?" I tried to explain, to make them understand the years of neglect and resentment that had fueled my actions, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. They saw only the perceived betrayal, not the pain that had driven me to it. Yet, as the flames of their anger raged, an unexpected force began to rise. A groundswell of support from those who had read my book and found their own stories reflected in its pages. "Thank you for giving a voice to the forgotten ones," read one comment on my blog. "Your courage to speak out is inspiring," another echoed. It was as if a dam had burst, unleashing a torrent of shared experiences and validations from people who had endured similar struggles. The more the backlash from my family intensified, the louder the voices of support became. Suddenly, my once isolated narrative had ignited a movement, a rallying cry for those who had been overlooked and neglected in favor of their siblings' successes. Media outlets began to take notice, eager to amplify the conversation around parental favoritism and its insidious effects. One by one, requests for interviews poured in, each offering a platform for me to share my story on a grander scale. At first, I hesitated, the fear of further alienating my family holding me back. But the echoes of those who had found solace in my words drowned out the doubts, fueling a newfound resolve within me. I accepted the interviews, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each retelling of my experiences. The more I spoke, the more the walls of shame and self-doubt crumbled, replaced by a sense of purpose and validation. You've given a voice to so many who have suffered in silence. One interviewer remarked, her eyes glistening with empathy. As the media frenzy reached fever pitch, my family's efforts to silence me only fueled the flames further. Their attempts to discredit my story and paint me as a disgruntled, attention-seeking child backfired spectacularly, drawing even more attention to the very issues they sought to bury. It was then that an unexpected opportunity presented itself, a publisher eager to capitalize on the growing interest in my story. They saw the potential in expanding my narrative beyond the confines of a blog, offering me a chance to share my experiences on a national scale. Without hesitation, I accepted their offer, my mind already racing with the possibilities of reaching an even wider audience. This was no longer just about venting my personal grievances. It had become a movement, a clarion call for change. With each interview, each article, and each new reader who found solace in my words, the flames of my rebellion burned brighter, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose and the knowledge that I was making a difference in the lives of countless others. The consequences I had once feared had become the very catalysts for my growth and empowerment. And as the smoke cleared, a new path emerged, one that would lead me toward a future beyond the shadows of my family's betrayal. As the firestorm of publicity surrounding my story raged on, the once quiet confines of Aunt Marla's apartment became a battlefield. Her initial disbelief had given way to outright hostility, fueled by the growing media attention. "How could you do this to our family?" she would snarl, her eyes narrowed with contempt. "You've dragged all of our names through the mud." I tried to reason with her, to explain that my intentions were never to hurt or betray, but merely to shed light on a systemic issue that had plagued my life. But my words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the echoes of her anger and disappointment. "You've made your bed, Rowan," she spat. "Now you'll have to lie in it." And lie in it I did, as the consequences of my actions began to unfold in ways I could never have anticipated. My family's efforts to discredit me only added fuel to the fire, drawing even more attention to the very issues they sought to bury. "This is the epitome of parental neglect," one commentator remarked during a televised panel discussion. "The fact that they're trying to silence her only proves her point." With each passing day, the narrative shifted, transforming me from a disgruntled, attention-seeking child into a symbol of resilience and determination. My voice, once muffled by the weight of familial expectations, had become a rallying cry for those who had endured similar struggles. Invitations to speak at events and conferences poured in, each one offering a platform to amplify my message and connect with others who had found solace in my words. With every public appearance, the flames of my rebellion burned brighter, fueled by the knowledge that I was making a tangible difference in people's lives. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of support and validation, the rift within my own family deepened. Aunt Marla's once welcoming home had become a battleground, with tension and resentment hanging thick in the air. "You've made things so much harder for all of us," she would hiss, her words laced with venom. "Is this what you wanted?" In those moments, I had to remind myself of the countless messages from strangers who had found solace in my story. The parents who had vowed to change their ways, the siblings who had found the courage to speak up. My actions had rippled far beyond the confines of my own experience, touching lives in ways I could never have imagined. And so I persisted, weathering the storm of familial backlash with a newfound resolve. Each scathing remark, each attempt to discredit me, only fueled my determination to keep pushing forward, to keep amplifying the voices of those who had been silenced for far too long. The consequences I had once feared had become the catalysts for change, propelling me onto a path that would lead me far beyond the shadows of my family's betrayal. And as I stepped into the spotlight, I vowed to wield its power not for personal gain, but as a beacon of hope for those still trapped in the darkness. Just when I thought the storm of familial backlash had reached its peak, a new twist emerged, one that threatened to unravel the fragile sense of purpose I had cultivated. It was a crisp autumn evening when the doorbell rang, shattering the tense silence that had enveloped Aunt Marla's apartment. With a weary sigh, she rose from her chair, her footsteps heavy with resignation. "Rowan, it's for you," she called out, her voice tinged with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. I braced myself, steeling my nerves for yet another confrontation, another attempt to silence the truth I had so fiercely defended. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me at the door. There, standing side by side, were my parents. The very people who had cast me aside in pursuit of my brother's success. Their expressions were a study in contrasts, my mother's face etched with a mixture of shame and defiance, while my father's eyes held a glimmer of what almost seemed like remorse. "Rowan," my mother began, her voice wavering ever so slightly, "we've been thinking a lot, and we want to bring you back home." For a moment I was rendered speechless, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. After everything that had transpired, after the public outcry and the bitter divide they had created, they now sought to welcome me back into the fold? Why? I managed to choke out, my eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What's changed?" It was my father who spoke next, his tone carrying a somberness I had never witnessed before. "Cale's been injured," he said, the words seeming to catch in his throat. "His career, his future, it's all in jeopardy now." Suddenly the pieces began to fall into place. Their sudden desire to reconcile wasn't born of genuine remorse or a newfound appreciation for my struggles. It was a calculated attempt to use my newfound platform and public sympathy to bolster their son's faltering prospects. "So that's it then?" I spat, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You only want me back because you need me to save Cale's career?" Aunt Marla, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "Rowan, maybe you should hear them out," she urged, her eyes pleading with me to keep an open mind. But I had heard enough. The truth, as ugly as it was, had finally been laid bare, stripping away any lingering illusions about my family's motivations. "No," I said firmly, my resolve hardening with each passing second. "I won't be a pawn in your game any longer." With that, I turned on my heel and retreated back into the apartment, slamming the door behind me. The echoes of my parents' protests faded into the distance, drowned out by the overwhelming sense of validation that coursed through my veins. They had revealed their true colors, confirming what I had suspected all along. Their love and acceptance were conditional, hinging on my willingness to play a supporting role in Cale's narrative. As I paced the confines of the apartment, a newfound determination took root within me. If they thought I would simply capitulate and play along with their charade, they were sorely mistaken. It was time to take a stand, to confront them publicly and expose the depths of their conditional affection. The world had rallied behind my story, my voice, and now I would wield that power to shatter the facade they had so carefully constructed. With trembling fingers, I began to draft a statement, pouring my emotions onto the page with a fervor that betrayed years of pent-up frustration. This would be my moment, my opportunity to reclaim the narrative and reveal the ugly truth that had been obscured for far too long. As the words took shape, a sense of liberation washed over me. I was no longer the forgotten child, relegated to the shadows of my family's ambitions. I was a force to be reckoned with, a voice that would not be silenced, and the world was about to bear witness to my defiance. The air was thick with tension as I stepped into the dimly lit coffee shop, my hands trembling ever so slightly. This was it. The moment I had been both dreading and anticipating, the culmination of years of pent-up frustration and resentment. My parents sat huddled together at a corner table, their faces a mask of apprehension and confusion. They had come at my insistence, summoned to this public venue under the guise of seeking reconciliation. But reconciliation was the furthest thing from my mind. This was my chance to confront them, to strip away the facade of familial devotion they had so carefully constructed, and expose the truth that had been obscured for far too long. As I approached the table, their eyes met mine, a flicker of hope mingled with trepidation. "Rowan," my mother began, her voice strained, "we're so glad you agreed to meet with us." I said nothing, simply taking my seat across from them, my gaze unwavering. The silence stretched on, thick and palpable, as I let the tension build, savoring the power I now held. Finally I spoke, my voice steady and resolute. "Why did you really come back for me?" My father exchanged a puzzled glance with my mother before turning back to me. We've already told you, sweetheart. We want to bring you home to be a family again. I shook my head slowly, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of my lips. No, that's not it. You only want me back because of Cale's injury, because you need the public sympathy to save his career. The words hung in the air like a heavy shroud, their weight suffocating. My parents' expressions shifted, a mixture of shock and anger flickering across their faces. How dare you accuse us of such a thing? My mother hissed, her eyes narrowing with fury. We are your parents, and we only want what's best for you. It was then that I knew I had struck a nerve, exposed the raw truth that they had so desperately tried to conceal. With a deep breath, I pressed on, determined to unravel the tangled web of lies they had woven. Really? I challenged, leaning forward in my chair. Then tell me, if Cale's career hadn't been jeopardized, would you have ever come back for me? The silence that followed was deafening, a silent admission of the truth we all knew but had refused to acknowledge. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their faces a study in conflicted emotions. Finally, it was my father who spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. Rowan, you have to understand, your brother's future was our priority. We couldn't let anything stand in the way of his success. There it was, the ugly truth laid bare for all to see. Their love, their acceptance, had always been conditional, a twisted hierarchy where my dreams and aspirations were mere footnotes in the grand narrative of Cale's ascent. So, that's it then? I shot back, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and vindication. Is it really me you came for, or is it the public sympathy you need for Cale? The silence that followed was deafening. A silent admission of the truth we all knew but had refused to acknowledge. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their faces a study in conflicted emotions. But I wasn't finished. With a steely resolve, I pressed on, determined to expose the depths of their betrayal to the world. You see, this is exactly why I wrote that book, why I shared our story, I declared, my voice rising in defiance. Because for too long, families like ours have operated under the illusion of unconditional love, when in reality, it's all about meeting certain conditions, sacrificing one child's dreams for another's. As the words spilled forth, I could feel the weight of years of resentment and neglect lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a sense of liberation and purpose. Around us, the hushed murmurs of the coffee shop patrons had given way to rapt attention, as if the entire room was holding its collective breath, hanging on my every word. In that moment, I knew I had won. The facade had crumbled, the truth laid bare for all to see. My parents sat before me, their masks stripped away, exposed as the flawed, conditional figures they truly were. And as the world bore witness to my defiance, a newfound sense of strength coursed through my veins. I was no longer the forgotten child, relegated to the shadows of my family's ambitions. I was a force to be reckoned with, a voice that would not be silenced. And this was only the beginning. The air was electric with excitement as I stepped into the bustling bookstore, the familiar scent of freshly printed pages mingling with the chatter of eager fans. This was a moment I had once only dreamed of, a celebration of my story, my journey, and the power of a single voice to ignite a movement. Aunt Marla stood at the front of the crowd, her face beaming with pride, a stark contrast to the indifference she had once shown. By her side were the friends I had made along the way, kindred spirits who had found solace and validation in my words and had rallied to my side as steadfast supporters. Rowan, we're all so incredibly proud of you, Aunt Marla gushed, enveloping me in a warm embrace. Who would have thought that your little blog would turn into this? I smiled, my cheeks flushing with a mixture of humility and triumph. It had been a long, arduous journey, fraught with pain and heartbreak, but also immense growth and self-discovery. As I took my seat at the signing table, the first fan stepped forward, clutching a copy of my book with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Your words gave me the courage to speak up about my own struggles." One by one, they came, each with their own story, their own journey that had intersected with mine. A mother who had vowed to change her ways, a sibling who had found the strength to confront long-buried resentments. My words had struck a chord, resonating far beyond the confines of my personal experience. With each signature, each heartfelt exchange, I felt a sense of purpose and validation that transcended any accolade or achievement. This was no longer just about my story. It was about giving a voice to the voiceless, shining a light on the insidious impacts of parental favoritism and conditional love. As the line dwindled and the event drew to a close, Aunt Marla approached me once more, her eyes shining with a newfound understanding and appreciation. "Rowan, I owe you an apology," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "For so long, I was blinded by the idea of supporting Cale's dreams that I failed to see the pain and neglect you were enduring." I opened my mouth to respond, but she held up a hand, silencing me with a gentle shake of her head. "No, let me finish. What you've accomplished here, the lives you've touched, the conversations you've sparked, it's made me realize that true love, true support, isn't about putting one child on a pedestal at the expense of the other. It's about nurturing each unique talent, each individual dream, and creating an environment where everyone feels valued and seen." Her words washed over me like a soothing balm, healing wounds I hadn't even realized were still raw. To have the person who had once epitomized my family's conditional love now embracing the very ideals I had fought so hard to uphold was a victory beyond measure. As I looked around at the smiling faces of my newfound family, the friends, supporters, and kindred spirits who had rallied to my side, I knew that I had found something far more precious than any blood tie could offer. "You've made us all so proud, more than any sport or blog ever could," Aunt Marla continued, her voice thick with emotion. "And I promise, from this day forward, to be the kind of supportive presence you deserved all along." In that moment, I felt a sense of closure, a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The resentment, the anger, the years of neglect, they no longer held the same power over me. As I embraced Aunt Marla, surrounded by the warmth and acceptance of my chosen family, I knew that I had already won. The consequences of my actions, once so feared, had become the catalysts for personal growth and societal change. And as I looked towards the future, I saw endless possibilities. A world where no child would ever have to endure the pain of conditional love. A world where every dream, every talent would be nurtured and celebrated. With a renewed sense of purpose and determination, I vowed to continue amplifying the voices of the overlooked, using my platform to inspire and empower others to stand up and demand the recognition they deserved. This was no longer just my story. It was a movement, a rallying cry for change that would echo far beyond the pages of a book. And as I stepped out into the world, my head held high, I knew that I was no longer the forgotten child, relegated to the shadows of someone else's ambitions. I was a force to be reckoned with, a voice that would not be silenced. And this was only the beginning.